Great. Our presenter today is Joe Savage, Regional Coordinator with the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. Joe is a recognized leader with over 15 years of experience in the fields of homelessness, social policy, economic development, and human services administration. His prior work experience encompasses position in which he was responsible for overseeing transitional and permanent supportive housing, continuum of care funding, strategic planning, and coalition building. So basically, this is a guy who really knows what he's talking about, and we are very happy to have him here with us today. So with that, Joe, I am handing it over to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity to be on this webinar with everyone. And before I get started on our topic for today, just a disclaimer, I am actually on vacation in beautiful Barbados with my kids. I've been here going on a week now. And so they are getting ready, getting dressed to go to the beach. So if you hear some background noise, please excuse that. It is always a production getting them ready to head out. So with that being said, what I want to do today is I want to talk about Home Together and racial disparities in homelessness, and particularly the tools that we have at the federal level provided you so far, and then also talk about some upcoming tools to assist your communities in looking at your homeless data and understanding racial disparities within your communities. As you may have noticed in the last HUD-NOFA, there was a question in there regarding racial disparities, for which you all had to answer and received points regarding that. So just understand at the federal level, looking at your data and understanding racial disparities within your homelessness system is a priority for us. Here is my contact information. Please feel free to take it down. I'm actually easiest to reach via email. So that's the quickest way to reach me. And of course, I can answer your questions regarding anything that's presented today or anything you may have in the future. Please feel free to reach out to me. So as you may know, we released a revised federal strategic plan called Home Together. We released it in July of 2018. You can go to our website. The address is there, /home-together, in order to read the revised plan. And the reason why I opened up with this is because one of the things that we are really seeking to emphasize under this revised federal strategic plan is looking at the racial disparities that exist within homelessness. And so when we revised the federal strategic plan, we did a number of listening sessions, getting feedback from communities, getting feedback from persons with lived experience, as well as consulting with national partners, and really just understanding what they would want to see in the revised plan. So we decided to revise the plan by keeping in what works and then providing increased emphasis on certain areas. And one of those areas is racial disparities within homelessness. And so the plan Home Together, that's just a slide showing you how we've got that title, Home. We know that that's the solution to ending homelessness. Everyone should have a safe and stable place to call home. And then together, we know that we can't accomplish that unless we are working together and building those strong partnerships and collaborations. So I do encourage you to go to our website and read the revised federal strategic plan. Now, as mentioned, one of the areas of increased emphasis that we are focusing on at the federal level are the racial disparities that exist within homelessness. So I just want to look at the data overall first. And so this is based on data that has come out of multiple studies, and particularly the Center for Social Innovation under their SPARC initiative, SPARC, and that stands for Supporting Partnerships for Anti-Racist Communities. And essentially what the data has shown us is that if we look nationally, Black people comprise 13% of the general population, but account for over 40% of the homeless population, and then 50% of homeless families. And one of the things that we do understand is that we cannot account for this overrepresentation of Blacks in the homeless population due to poverty. That's not what's causing it. So what we have come to understand is that there are other systemic structures in place, such as structural racism, that are primary drivers of these disparities in homelessness. So if we look at things such as housing discrimination, the criminal justice system, mortgage lending. Some of you may be familiar with the practice of redlining, where certain communities were prohibited from providing home mortgages to persons of color. And then also eviction practices. There are many communities that are looking at their eviction rates, and they're finding out that Black females are disproportionately affected by evictions. So there are a lot of structural things that are contributing to these disparities that we see within homelessness, and we know that it's not solely due to poverty. So if we look at the data for other ethnicities, we see the same thing as well. If we look at American Indians, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, even though those comprise less than 5% of the general population, each group's proportion within the homelessness system is more than double their representation in the general population. And we see the same thing for people who identify as Hispanic. And then when we look at whites and Asians, they are considerably underrepresented within the homelessness population. And when we talk about that word disparity and what we want you to understand in terms of what that looks like, whenever the percentage of a particular race within your homelessness system is greater than the percentage of that race within the general population, then you have a disparity. So for example, if within your homelessness system, Blacks comprise 60% of the homeless persons, but yet in your general population within your COC geographic area, they comprise only 20% of the population, then you have a disparity. So when we talk about disparity, that's what we mean when there's an overrepresentation within your homelessness system compared to your general population. So what we've seen in the research, and you can access the research by going to the National Alliance's website or even the Center for Social Innovation, their website. If you do a Google search for SPARC, SPARC, it will definitely pull up the study. So what we're seeing is that persons of color, minority groups, are overrepresented within the homelessness population. We know that the explanation for the overrepresentation is not due to poverty. And so we understand that there are some structural and systemic causes that are leading to the disparities within race that we see within the homelessness system. And this chart right here just shows you an example of what that looks like if you take the data and you map it out. So for each of those racial groups, if you look at the third bar to the right where it has homeless population, so you have U.S. population, you have poverty population, and then you have that third bar, homeless population. If you look at the Black or African American section of this graph, this is a clear illustration. You see how that third bar to the right, homeless population, is greater than the other two bars. That right there is showing that you have a disparity. Because in the U.S. population, Blacks represent 13%, and then of those in poverty, they represent 23%, but yet within the homelessness system, they represent 40%. So whenever that third bar to the right is greater than the previous two bars, you have a disparity. You have an overrepresentation that cannot be accounted for by poverty alone. So this graph is just showing you what that looks like if you were to map out the data in this way. And if you look at the white population, at the far right of this chart, you will see it's the reverse. 79% in the overall U.S. population, 66% within poverty, but only 50% within the homelessness population. So they're not overrepresented within homelessness. So that's what this looks like as a chart if you take the data and you map it out this way. All right, so as far as what we would like to see communities doing in terms of addressing disparities within your homelessness systems. So at the federal level, we want you to take the following steps. Number one, we want you to review race and ethnicity using your HMIS data and compare the population proportions to that of the general population within your COC geography. And HUD has actually released a COC racial equity analysis tool. The link is right there on the slide, or you can go to HUD Exchange .info, and if you just do keyword COC racial equity analysis tool, it will pull this tool up. And essentially what this tool is going to enable you to do, you don't have to worry about gathering this data for this first step. This tool is going to do all of that for you. It was developed by Apt Associates. It's a really simple and easy tool to use. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It also comes with a PDF document that kind of gives you the technical specifications as well as some general instructions. And then instructions and explanations are also included within the Excel tool as well on different spreadsheets. And so essentially what you will do with this tool is you just simply use a drop-down menu to identify your COC. So I used to work for the city of Philadelphia, so I would go in and just pick PA 500 from the drop-down menu, and what the tool will do is it will populate all of the data automatically. What Apt Associates did with this tool is they use block groups, and then they use census block groups to build out the geography for each individual COC. So what this tool is going to do, it's going to pull race and ethnicity data by COC, and it's also going to pull that data for the state. And it's going to do two things with this data. It's going to break out race and ethnicity by homeless population and poverty. And the reason why it breaks it out by homeless population and poverty is because we want you to look at this data, and we first want you to understand whether or not poverty is accounting for any overrepresentation. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, if the percentage of a particular race that's in poverty is lower than its percentage within the homelessness population, then poverty alone cannot account for the disparity that exists for that particular population. So what the COC racial equity tool is going to do, it uses 2017 point-in-time count data, and then it uses American Community Survey data from 2011 to 2014. And it uses that data to, number one, pull homelessness data within your community, and then also pull poverty data within your community. And again, it does it at the level of the COC so that you can look specifically at your COC. And then it also does it at the state level so that you can see how your COC compares to the larger state. And again, it's first going to help you look at that representation of each race and then also by ethnicity and understand that comparison to the rate of poverty, so that you can clearly understand within your community whether or not poverty alone accounts for the disparities that you see. And so that's going to be the first part of the COC racial equity analysis tool. Then the second part of this tool is going to help you do the comparison that I was showing you in the previous slides with the data. It's going to look at race and ethnicity for the general population within your COC. And then it's going to also look at race and ethnicity within your homelessness system. And again, you're going to compare the proportion of individuals by race in the general population to the proportion of individuals by race within your homelessness system. And again, a disparity exists when the proportion of that population within your homelessness system is greater than the proportion of that population within your overall COC geographic area. And so that's what the COC racial equity analysis tool does. It lets you take that first step to see if a disparity exists, and then if that disparity does exist, can poverty alone explain it? And it will help you answer that question. Now, recently, another tool has been released by the National Alliance, and it looks particularly at outcomes. within your homelessness system, and it looks at those outcomes by race and ethnicity. I didn't get a chance to update these slides yet with that tool because it actually just came out. And so this particular tool that you can access at the National Alliance website, I believe if you do keyword search for equity tool, it will pull this tool up. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to help you look at your homelessness data, and it's going to help you break that homelessness data out by race. And then it's going to ask you to put in that data and also break it out by who's accessing crisis services. So who's getting into emergency shelter, who's getting into transitional housing, and then who's getting into permanent housing, and then who's also returning to homelessness. And what this tool will do is it will help you understand whether or not your system is having equitable outcomes. And what we mean by equitable outcomes is this. If you use this NAEH tool, and let's say Blacks make up 40% of your homeless population, but when you look at that same breakout by race of people who are accessing emergency shelter, and you see that Blacks are accessing emergency shelter at a proportion that's lower than their overall representation within the homelessness system, then you're not having equitable outcomes. And so that's what NAEH's tool is going to help you to do. It's going to help you look at outcomes. Who's accessing emergency housing? Who's accessing transitional housing? Who's accessing permanent housing? And then who's returning to homelessness? And it's going to help you understand whether or not those rates by race are equitable within your homelessness system. So HUD's COC racial equity tool is going to help you determine, does a disparity exist? And if so, can it be explained due to poverty? Then NAEH's tool is going to take another step and help you look at the outcomes within your crisis response system to determine whether or not those outcomes are equitable. And then another thing that is about to come out, many of you may know that the AHAR, the Annual Homeless Assessment Report, is now called the LSA, Longitudinal System Analysis Tool. And the LSA is going to have another tool within it that will be available to you all, and it's really going to help you take your homelessness data that you upload to HUD and be able to slice it and dice it in multiple ways by race and ethnicity, so that you will be able to look at how long persons have been homeless by race and ethnicity, who's getting access to permanent supportive housing by race and ethnicity, how long is it taking people to get from point A to point B within your system by race and ethnicity. So the tool that's going to be released within the LSA is really going to be able to help you slice and dice your data by race and ethnicity and really take a deeper dive. So essentially, you're going to have three tools. You're going to have the COC Racial Equity Analysis tool that's going to help you determine if a disparity exists, and if it does, can it be accounted for due to poverty. Then you have NAEH's tool, which helps you look at program outcomes to see if folks are accessing emergency services at equitable rates, and then also seeing if your returns to homelessness are at an equitable rate. And then you're going to have this tool within the LSA that's going to really be able to take a deeper dive within your programs and within HUD's outcomes and be able to slice and dice that data by race and ethnicity to be able to do that comparison. And the reason why it's going to be important to do this deeper dive, some communities may find that racial disparities do not exist within their homelessness system. So they may have 20% representation of Blacks within their homelessness system, but within their overall population, Blacks may be at 40%. So that community may say, okay, we don't have a racial disparity when we compare the percentage of Blacks within our homelessness system to the percentage of Blacks within our general population. However, if they do a deeper dive to see, okay, by race and ethnicity, who's accessing permanent supportive housing, who's being homeless longer, they may then begin to see racial disparities within their program outcomes. So we definitely don't want communities to stop at this first step where they use the COC racial equity analysis tool. And let's say they determine that disparities do not exist. Hey, fine, meeting adjourned, we can all go home. No, we want you to take that deeper dive and look at your program outcomes. And this is step 2, look at your program outcomes and then determine within those outcomes, do disparities also exist? Because people should be accessing services and housing at equitable rates, and your outcomes should also be equitable. And so one of the other things that we're also going to be doing, and this is tied to step 2, we're hearing from a lot of communities, okay, we've done this initial data analysis. We know that the disparities exist. So what do we do next? What are our next steps in terms of addressing these racial disparities? So USICH, we're going to be releasing a strategies document that is going to be giving communities some guidance around next steps. So once they determine that a disparity exists, and even in the cases where disparity may not exist, what are those next steps in terms of addressing those particular racial disparities within your community's homelessness system? So step 3, okay, so you've analyzed the data, you determine where the disparities are, you've looked within your programs, you're looking within your outcomes, you're using all of these wonderful tools to break things out by race and ethnicity. So now what do you begin to do? So let's say you now have our strategies document, which should be coming out in a few weeks. You now have our strategies document. One of the things that we want you to do is to begin to have conversations. And you have to have conversations with the institutes and the structures that are outside of the homelessness system that are feeding these disparities. One of the things that we do understand at the federal level is that it's beyond the purview of the homelessness system to address these structural institutions, these structural policies, structural racism, implicit bias, etc. We know that it's going to take conversations between the homelessness system and these other systems. So you really have to begin to get those folks at the table and really start having these conversations. And then even within your homelessness system, within the agencies, the service providers, etc., they need to start having these conversations internally within their agencies as well, looking at implicit bias, looking at their programs as well as their policies to see if their policies are contributing to some of the racial disparities that might be existing within program outcomes. We do know, and we have heard from homeless youth, particularly LGBTQ youth of color, that oftentimes they're steered into transitional housing, and they're in transitional housing longer than their white counterparts, who tend to go directly into permanent housing of some sort. And from what we've heard from them in terms of doing interviews and understanding the dynamics and what happens, they're letting us know that case managers, their case is being handled by white case managers who view them as being more aggressive because of their behaviors, etc., and they're being steered into transitional housing because they're being viewed as needing to get their aggressive behaviors under control before they can go into housing. So then that raises a question, maybe there's some implicit bias there that's causing that. And so agencies, service providers really need to also begin to have these conversations internally within their agency about implicit bias, about their policies, about their programs, and whether or not they are contributing to disparities in the outcomes within their systems. But for the COC as a whole, we really want you to get criminal justice at the table, get child welfare at the table, get the justice system at the table, even workforce development and lending institutions at the table, and really begin to have these conversations about these structures and these policies that are contributing to these disparities. And then the fourth step, which I actually already mentioned, really looking within individual organizations to address such things as implicit bias, and even looking at organizational structure and hiring practices when the Center for Social Innovation, Their Spark initiative, they did their study and then they worked with a select number of communities. One of the things that they did in working with those communities and the agencies within those communities, they had them also look at their organizational structure. Is your organizational structure reflective of the population that you are serving? And what they found in their research was that on the front line, let's say at the level of the case managers or peer support specialists, the organizational structure was very reflective of the race of the clients that were being served. But once it got into the administration, the executive leadership, and even the board composition, it was primarily white. And so they had these organizations look at their structure to see if even within their structure, is there proper representation, is there diversity within those structures. So we're really talking about a comprehensive look at race, structural racism, and its impact on the homelessness system, how it's feeding these disparities, and then what communities should begin to do to address those disparities. And that first step is looking at your data to determine if the disparities exist and if it can be explained by poverty alone. Then that second step, taking that deeper dive, looking at your program outcomes, making sure that outcomes are equitable across your system, and then beginning to have those conversations with those necessary institutions in order to talk about the drivers behind these disparities that we see within homelessness, and then also looking within your individual organizations and really having those conversations and doing some training around implicit bias, looking at your organizational structures and looking at your organizational policies, because again, all of these things can contribute to the disparities that we see within homelessness. And we know that this is a lot of work. We know that this is taking things beyond the realm of homelessness, because we're now talking about structural racism. We're now talking about institutions and policies that have a history of negatively impacting persons of color for years. And so we know this is going beyond the purview of what the homelessness system has been designed to address. But we believe that if you get the right people at the table and begin to have these conversations, also look into getting some training around racial equity and implicit bias, we believe that we can really begin to address this issue, and we can really begin to deal with these disparities that we are seeing and experiencing within the homelessness system. So as you can see with the most recent NOFA that came out last year, then HUD has its racial equity tool, NAEH has released its tool, and then USICH, we will be releasing our strategies document. This is a priority for us at the federal level. And so trust me, you will see more about racial disparities at the federal level in the future. And so we really want to be able to equip you all with the necessary tools to really begin to look at your data and then take the next step. So I do encourage you to go to NAEH's website. They have some great studies on racial disparities. Then they have their tool. If you go to the Center for Social Innovation, I believe their website is the letter C as in cat, the number 4, S as in Sam, I as an individual.org, C4SI.org, which stands for the Center for Social Innovation. And you'll simply look up their Spark initiative, S as in Sam, P as in Paul, A, R as in Robert, C as in cat, Spark, and you can pull up their study that they've done. They released phase 1 of their report, and they also did some qualitative interviews with people with lived experience. They did some work within agencies, and you can find more about what these disparities look like at the national level. But again, it is a priority for us at the federal level, and those two tools from HUD as well as NAEH have been released. And then again, USICH, within the next few weeks, we will be releasing a strategies document to really help you take those next steps beyond the data once you determine that those disparities do exist within your system. And I believe that is it. So again, go to our website, look at Home Together. Please do read the full plan. We also release some supplemental documents that break out sub-pop information. So homelessness in America families, homelessness in America veterans, and it really looks at the data by subpopulation via the federal strategic plan. And so go to our website, read the plan, access those tools from HUD's website as well as NAEH, and really start taking a look at the data within your system, and then look for our strategies document within the next few weeks. So I'm finished at this point. I believe we can now start taking questions, and our moderator will take care of making sure I see those questions and respond.
Right. So our first question it came up when we were looking at slide 7 with the graph. I'm going to put that up on our screen. And the question is, would a large amount of that percentage be due to the acts of redlining and gentrification in lower income areas?
That is a possible reason. So when I talked about those institutions and structural racism, redlining, gentrification, all of those things are included in that. So one of the things that we do know that redlining, the practice of not loaning to persons of color within certain areas, has caused a huge gap in the home ownership rate within the United States. So of course, that means if persons of color aren't accessing home ownership opportunities, then they're renting. And then if you tie that into gentrification with rents going up and becoming unaffordable, then that's pushing people out of neighborhoods, and it's pushing them into neighborhoods of a lesser quality, or they're trying to stay in that neighborhood, but the rents are increasing due to the gentrification, and they end up losing that housing, and they come into the homelessness system. So yes, systems such as redlining as well as gentrification can indeed be playing a part, and we do believe that it is playing a part in the disparities that we're seeing.
Great. Our next question is, will the HUD site allow you to drill down the data to the county level, especially for those regional COCs and balance of states?
At this time, it doesn't do that. It's just going to pull it up at the COC level. But what I believe you will be able to do in the future is be able to break it out by different geographic regions within your COC, especially if you're a large balance of state COC. So right now, it's just going to be at the COC level.
Okay. And once you assess racial disparities in your community, what are recommended strategies to begin addressing racial disparities that are in compliance with fair housing and equal access laws?
Sure. So when I mentioned earlier about our strategies document that we're going to be releasing from USICH within a few weeks, it's going to answer that very question. We're going to give you a number of strategies and things that we feel communities should be doing in order to address those racial disparities, and particularly looking at things such as housing discrimination as well as fair housing. So look for that within the next few weeks. Great.
And then is there any sort of existing documents or trainings, whether on your website or maybe on the National Alliance to End Homelessness website, that really helps, just within the agency level, start to have the conversation around our own implicit biases?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So there are a number of agencies that will provide that training to your particular community at the agency level. And not only they will help you look at your community data, but then they'll also help you look internally within your particular organization, looking at your hiring practices, looking at your policies. They'll do training around implicit bias, etc. Now, this is the thing. I cannot recommend or mention any one particular agency. However, If you go to the National Alliance's website or even go to the Center for Social Innovation's website, if you read the reports, they're going to mention agencies within that report. If you go to NAEH past conference websites and look for the workshops on racial equity, you will probably see the name of an agency within that slide presentation. But there are agencies out there that do this training. I'm pretty sure if you just do a Google keyword search for racial equity training, it will pull up a number of agencies that do this training that will help you look at it at the organization level and deal with implicit bias.
Great. And so with that, I just want to open it up to the audience. We do have a fair amount of folks on the phone, so if anybody has a question, all you have to do is press *7 to unmute yourself. All right, let me try unmuting some folks. Hopefully we won't get too much background noise.
The conference has been unmuted.
All right, is there any questions from anybody on the phone? No, that's very, very loud.
The conference has been muted.
Okay. All right, well, if there isn't any other questions, I will be sure to send out a copy of this PowerPoint presentation as well as links to the National Alliance Equity Tool and the Center for Social Innovation website. And if there isn't anything else, I want to thank everybody for getting on the call today. And of course, thank Joe for joining us all the way from Barbados. Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. I'm on my way to the beach now.
Enjoy. And again, thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you next time.